So our world since the dawn of time has always struggled with wars. The Ukrainian War currently is showing us a glimpse into the future of combat, and it's potentially the first step into a larger conflict our world has yet to have ever seen. Ukraine is like a younger brother, one who has for 3 decades and even longer tried escaping its older bully of a brother, Russia. The Ukrainian War hardly sees news coverage or public support unless it's to rile up Americans about why our tax dollars are being sent to this war rather than invested at home. Ukraine has shown tremendous heart, especially the injured soldiers who fight every day to thrive and continue on. Today, we have a guest who has been involved in the war since 2022, assisting multiple NGOs and raising money to support severely injured Ukrainian veterans, retired Colonel Sam Hartwell. Colonel, welcome. Could you please tell us a brief bit about your unique perspective and your background?
Right. Well, I graduated from West Point in 1981. I was commissioned Army intelligence officer. I studied the Russian army, basically, is what we were focused on for some years. And I was stationed in Korea for 2 years, and then ultimately Germany for about 6.5 years against the Red Army in East Germany. I was active until the end of the Gulf War. I got out. I was in international banking for some years, based in Ukraine, actually, for about 3 of those years, um, in the private sector, and then also working for the U.S. government. Um, but after 9/11, I got back onto active duty, and I ended up serving a total of 36 months in Afghanistan. And yeah, then after I'd gotten out of the army and retired from everything before the invasion, I was living in Italy in February of 2012. Yeah.
So take us back to February 24, 2022, when Russia invades Ukraine. Where are you? I think you kind of just said there, but what were you doing and what was your reaction to the news?
Well, actually, I was on vacation in Hawaii, and several friends were calling me talking about it. Is he really going to invade? And we thought no, that he really wouldn't, that the rational thing was to not invade, but to keep signaling that he would do such a thing if he didn't get what he wanted. But then it actually happened, and I just since I'd lived over here for so long and had so many friends, I came over immediately as quickly as I could.
So I have to say up front, Colonel Hartwell and myself have known each other for over 40 years. So it's a pleasure to get your perspective on this. And when I think about your career, as you mentioned it, it reminds me of the Napoleon quote where he said, march to the sound of the guns. As it didn't matter if it was the Gulf War in 91 or if it was even in Afghanistan. You know, unlike a lot of our classmates, you rejoined and actually and did what you could and served the country. So we're always proud of that. But I want you to, as we talk about the war starts, you know, President Biden told Ukrainian President Zelensky immediately he should leave the country. And the president of Ukraine responded saying, the fight is here. I need ammunition, not a ride. So what happened during that first month that the Ukrainians were able to successfully stop this Russian invasion?
Well, they were hanging on by their fingernails. I mean, I know guys that actually volunteered. One guy as an economics professor, never been in uniform in his life. 3 days after the invasion, not the war, it's actually the invasion is what it's called here. The war actually started back in 2014, the first invasion. But so they, you know, guys just ran to the front lines. It was amazing what some of these guys were doing. I met guys that tried to join in Lviv, but couldn't because the lines were so huge for 3 days. They just drove into Kiev and joined the army. So I was just amazed, flabbergasted at how many of these guys were in all of these different recruiting stations in Western Ukraine where I was at.
I think it's important. You mentioned 2014. I think it's important we kind of explain a bit of the background of Ukraine and Russia's conflict. Can you kind of explain a little bit of the start of these two countries kind of being at conflict and being rivals?
Well, historically, it all goes back to the Soviet Union, and a lot of people who think they know the history of the Soviet Union say that Khrushchev just gave it to Ukraine. Well, gave Crimea and the Donbass to Ukraine back in, I think it was 54 or 56, in the 50s. Well, it wasn't quite that easy. He didn't just give it to them. It was voted by the Politburo, which is not just, in those days especially, you did not have just a single power player like Putin to control everything. No, you had departments like you do in the U.S. and they functioned, and there were power centers, and it made sense actually to assign the Donbass and Crimea to the state of Ukraine because all of their resources that went to these areas came from Ukraine anyway. So why have manage the resource flows from another Russian province to Ukraine and then to provinces inside Ukraine? So let's just reassign the whole territory to Ukraine, and then it's managerially, much easier to do. That's the reason that they did it, and so that's also the reason now that you hear Putin constantly saying that Crimea is historically Russian. Well, it's not, and they say that about Odessa too, because that's where Catherine the Great had her winter palace. So basically any place that Russia ever touched in its life is Russian, which includes Alaska and Hawaii, by the way.
I also think it's interesting when some people will say like, oh, Ukraine is, Russia had Ukraine for so long, or it's like their country. People forget. I mean, the land of Ukraine, and especially borders back in the day, was so disputed. Everyone was fighting for it. I mean, the Ottomans had some hold of Ukraine. The Polish-Lithuania country had hold. I mean, people and Ukraine, I believe, it was like Kieva. There was they kind of had their own country even before, kind of going all through these border disputes. So I think, what do you think of like the claim of people saying like, Russia had it for so long when it was a part of the Soviet Union? Do you think there's anything interesting, or like not interesting, but like anything to that claim of people saying that?
Well, no, legal validity is, I think, what you're really
Yeah.
looking for there. No, absolutely not. In fact, that's why we fought 2 world wars to make those sorts of claims illegal, so that you just couldn't say, "Hey, that's my land from 2,000 years ago. Actually, I want it back." And that's what we thought we all agreed on after the Second World War. But here you have these guys like Putin and perhaps Xi who want to keep doing this or want to do it again.
So, Colonel, when did you arrive? In March of 22, when did you actually arrive, and what was why did you make this decision to go there? What were you hoping to accomplish, or what were you thinking you were going to do when you got there?
Well, March 13th is when I got there. The point was that there was a former friend of mine. I didn't realize that he, first of all, where he lived was right at the main avenue of approach. That if the Russian army cleared the bridge at Irpin, they were going to be driving 30% of that military formation would be driving right past his apartment. And you know the Russian army, and if you saw the early videos, you know that they'll just shoot anything. It doesn't matter if it's a military thing or not. It's an apartment, it's a car, they're going to shoot at it if it's moving or if they see any sign of life. So you got to get out of there. Plus, his wife was blind and on dialysis. And, if she doesn't get dialysis every other day, she'd be dead in 5 to 7 days. And they had a 9-year-old daughter at this point. So I said, all right, I'm going to meet you guys and get you out of Ukraine. So long story short, because he was under 60 and was not legally out of the country, we had to find various legal ways to get him out because of her extreme medical status. But they got out and they're still in Rome being taken care of by a Rome charity. Anyway, I went back after that and found out that there were, a lot of, still some friends that I'd have to look after, their families, and then quite a few of these NGOs who were delivering non-lethal aid, usually medical stuff.
All right, let's talk about NATO's response to the war. They've really united around Ukraine and provided billions of dollars in arms and equipment to the Ukrainian forces. In addition, Western nations have provided billions of euros in financial and humanitarian assistance. Has it been enough? And also, have they sent really the optimal arms to win the war?
Short answers to both those questions: no, not enough. Not enough arms, and not fast enough, and not the right ones. I mean, that has been this administration's approach since the beginning. I think everybody gets that now. It's too slow and too few. Of course, there's some things that you just can't wave a magic wand and hand over 150 F-15s, because there's training and maintenance that literally does take 2 years for our pilots. So that's an issue. But things like, I don't understand why we didn't give them all of the M1 tanks that we have that we no longer use. We just put 400 Marine M1 tanks into mothballs. Why didn't we give them to the Ukrainians 2 years ago? Things like that don't make sense to me. The other support, what was the other support question? Since the beginning,
has it been enough overall with the all of NATO's?
Okay. Again, short answer, no. And what do they need now? Everything that we've been talking about for 6 months, the ATACMS especially, and more F-16s with their air-to-air and air-to-ground missile capabilities. That's what's needed right now. The Russians are getting pummeled. The Ukrainians are getting pummeled on the ground by these glide bombs, they're called. They can travel 120 kilometers. That's 70 miles. You just put it on a glide path, and it's going to go to a predetermined, site, for lack of a specific term. And they're getting 60 to 80 of these a day on their frontline units. So it doesn't matter, things like how many Russian tanks are left or how many Russian fighting vehicles are left, because when you've got that kind of air superiority, it doesn't matter that much. And then also, if you look at their rocket production, because we've gotten some briefings that have been enlightening, and it indicates that some of the Russian rockets that they want to build next year are going to be increased by 180%. So they're obviously not quitting, and the strategy has shifted completely to air almost. You can't do anything on the ground with total, absolute air superiority. The Russians have it, and they're still not making huge gains on the ground. The Ukrainians do not have even close to air parity, but they seem to be holding their ground a lot better than the Russians. How long can this go on? Don't know. That's everybody's open question. What are the next steps with NATO? Don't know. Don't know what Putin will really accept. Don't know what really Europe and Ukraine are prepared to give away. Those are the open questions.
Yeah, we're gonna dig into that more. We looked it up, and the U.S. since 2022 has given $64 billion in military assistance. And since actually 2014, it goes up to 67 billion. The European countries claim to have given twice that, 126 billion in military and financial and humanitarian assistance, especially taking care of refugees. So it's a sizable amount. And even more interesting is Denmark's given the most as a percent of their GDP, believe that or not, 1.88 versus Estonia's second, 1.66%. The US, by comparison, 0.35% of our GDP has gone to the Ukrainian war effort. As Americans like to say, should Europe be doing a lot more to try and aid this?
Well, yeah, going back to your original, numbers that you mentioned, and everybody sees different numbers, but I saw one very well done analysis from a Turkish institute, which people could say is not our best friend in NATO these days, and they might be right. And they itemized it very well and came up with 152 billion euros. Euros or dollars. Let's leave it at that. And then the U.S. Was very specific as well, was up at that point to about 63 or 65 billion. So yeah, I believe that there is a lot more support from the European side, which is mostly monetary, economic, and refugee support, whereas critical weaponry, most of that came from the U.S. The early weaponry, especially from the Eastern Bloc, was all former Soviet gear, which was good too, because that's what the Ukrainians are used to, while they get used to and trained up on the other NATO stuff. So that was good. So is everyone doing their part? I would say yes, and I would say that actually we're the ones not doing enough on a per GDP basis, as you point out there, because it's not just those two countries that have spent so much. There's more. There's Poland, there's the other Baltics, there's the Netherlands. I dare say even the UK. But anyway, go ahead.
Speaking of European countries doing their part, I'm curious, what's your thoughts on Germany saying they're not going to be giving any more financial aid to Ukraine and that whole fiasco that's been going on?
Well, they haven't said that they're not going to do any more. That was misinterpreted, and probably on purpose for the newsworthiness aspects. But this prime minister is not liked. This chancellor, I should say, is not well liked at all. He's just at the bottom with absolutely everybody. And he's been a pacifist from the beginning, so he's just going to fade away as the pacifist who let this all happen. That election will happen in the fall, and he'll be done with. And then likely, if this thing is still going on, if it depends on who the American president is and what their strategy is going to be. But if both Germany and the U.S. came out and said, "Hey, we're going to give Ukraine everything that they want, unless Russia, you do X, Y, Z," then this thing will continue. But it depends on the elections, again, in Germany and the U.S.
And then stayed on the topic of Germany. What's your thoughts on the Nord Stream pipeline whole thing?
I really don't know enough about even what we call is open source intelligence. I know that the Ukrainians on their side arrested a Ukrainian intelligence officer who they said was involved in a rogue operation. And of course, the Russians say that as well, but then there are other claims that, Germans blew it up, even though Germans have indicted, I believe they've indicted a Pole in that. So, to conclusion, too confusing to even be understandable at this point.
So earlier you mentioned the glide bomb, and air. Can you kind of talk about how this war is being fought and conducted? I mean, the infantry tactic, the use of tanks, and you'll see like the tanks with like the top part so it doesn't get droned. And, I mean the reliance on drones for hunter killers and not just recon tools. Can you kind of talk about how this war is actually being fought?
Yeah, no one could have predicted, even after the first year, that drones would be so dominant now in 2.5 years. Just a year later. No one could have figured that out, but now I think they're starting to see that, yeah, especially now, what's on the ground matters not so much as what's in the air. I mean, it was always a known aspect of what we call maneuver warfare, that to be successful, you had to have air superiority over your enemy. And ideally, with the Americans, we want air dominance, everything from satellites to helicopters. So the Ukrainians do not have, by any stretch, air parity. The Russians, we now see, even with all the sophisticated anti-aircraft missile technology that's out there, that I don't think any army can guarantee air superiority. So when you don't have air superiority, then you don't have maneuver warfare. And when you have, multi-million-dollar tanks that can be taken out completely by a drone that costs $2,500, and you can't guarantee a safe sky, then yeah, I think you shift dramatically back to leg infantry ultimately. And those guys are going to be carrying, or they're going to be on things like electric motorcycles or electric quads to move around the battlefield. And then, yeah, carry everything that they need, from anti-aircraft, anti-helicopter, anti-missile, to drones themselves, to anti-tank javelin, because it's just too easy to kill a mechanized vehicle now. Having said that, the Ukrainians love the Bradley, but that's only because the Bradley is facing the BMP. And yeah, when you're clearly outmatching somebody, then you're good with that. But if you don't control the skies, then your Bradley is not so advantageous. So again, it comes down to that issue.
And I mean, both you guys being military, can you both kind of like talk about how this invasion is coming in, where exactly, like what regions Russia is coming through, and like I mean, looking back through history, you can find a lot of what we see today in almost everything in the world. But have you seen kind of tactics like this before? Is there a war at all similar in regards of invasion of tactics, so on?
Well, at the beginning, yeah, you could see that it was a combination of a couple of things that Putin wanted to do, like he did in Afghanistan in 1979, which was basically a decapitation of the government. You go in and you kill the leadership, and the functional leadership that is at the ministerial and deputy ministerial levels, and even lower. I met Afghanis who had escaped to the U.S., who had lost over 150 of their extended families that worked in government, just because they worked in government. And so, yeah, you go in and you kill the leadership, and then you install your own. and things are easy. They thought they were going to march right in to Kiev and to Kharkiv especially, and Odessa. Odessa more so even than Kiev. But it didn't happen that way. So it was the shock of the century for Putin and his intel guys, because his intel guys have been telling him that this would be a cakewalk, that they had at the front of the columns, they had the police and the band up north. And then in the east, same thing in Kharkiv. They were shocked that they got any resistance there. And then down in Odessa and Mykolaiv also, it was ruthless down there. There was some very, very heavy fighting that we haven't seen anything like that since World War II, like island invasions.
So tell us, tell us about, I mean, Zelensky announced this month, I think, they're producing 4 million drones annually in Ukraine. What are they doing with these drones? I mean, give us a day in the life. Where are they deploying all these drones in such quantity?
Yeah, well, I just happened to have been to a site visit of one of the miniature killer drones, the ones that are about probably 18 inches, 24 inches in diameter. And they're called FPV, first person view. And it's just fire and forget. It goes where your eyes tell it to go. But it's susceptible to jamming. And I won't get into all of those details. But my God, this production facility, you wouldn't even have known it was there, first of all. And you're just literally shocked by the sheer quantities that they can produce in a day. Now, where is it covering? Well, they've got literally a 600-mile front line to cover, but there are a few hot spots that are, hotter than others. I have one friend he's the lead planning targeteer, let's say, for 200 kilometers of that 1,000-kilometer front, but it's not the most intensive. But at any one time, as I understand, there's 120 drones of various types, Russian types, in the air at any given time, reconnaissance or on combat missions.
And then on drones, just out of curiosity, what do you think the future of drones is? Are we at like it's where it's going to be in the future? Like, do you think there's a next level? Because you see, I mean, drones are being used in Israel during their current wars, in Ukraine. So what do you think? I mean, drones are so big. We're just looking at U.S. abroad military bases, and we have a drone base in Chad and Tunisia, and there's just so much potential clearly being used about these drones. Do you think there's something even beyond what we're seeing now that it can reach to?
Oh, absolutely. And first of all, it's driven by two things. First of all, it's not a human being. You don't lose a human life. And two, it's just so cheap compared to the, what you want to kill of the enemy's stuff. As I said before, a $2,500 FPV drone versus a $3 million T-72M3, right? I mean, you like those numbers. So I think there's obviously going to be a lot more devoted to drone warfare at all levels, just for those two reasons. Where it goes from here, yeah, that's hard to say, because at the end of the day, you do need troops on the ground. Just maybe not as many tanks or as many Bradleys. I don't know, right, Nick?
So battlefield doctrine, I mean, the tanks, you mentioned maneuverability unless you control the skies, and you're saying not just with fighters, but with drones. So they're rewriting all this military doctrine now, I'm assuming, right? I mean, it's not going
I
to be the
think-
same big warfare battles, right?
I think they're still watching because they don't. 'Cause, there's one thing that's not in this problem set, and that is a fixed wing. Nobody's trying to fly against one another because they're afraid of our Patriots, as they should be, and we don't have enough F-16s to even know if their A400 or if their A500 is even serious enough to deal with the F-15, let alone, our more advanced fighters, generation, 4 and 5? I don't know what the numbers are anymore. But yeah, if we don't know what the fixed wing air-to-air situation is, so that's an unknown there for me. But as for drones on tactical levels, really low level tactical, I mean, it functions like an A-10. It's the same mission, except it's one tank at a time, not 20 like an A-10.
So they have some with grenades because they're anti-personnel too. They're dropping them on 1-2 people at a time sometimes, right? They're dropping grenades or dropping.
Oh yeah, but that's going out of the way. It's those used to be like 2 kilograms, like 4.5 pounds. Now, I mean, the killer ones, they want to carry like 4 times 20 kilograms, so 4 times 88 pounds, and they want to do different things like the tactics were that it's carrying 4 bombs. Well, let's make sure let's have it carry 2 bombs and then 2 with napalm, because the bomb puts a hole in something, and then you need something like magnesium, which you're using now, or chromium that burns, and you can't put it out with water. Same with MOGAS or napalm. But yeah, so they're using some of that technology to increase their, what's the right
And we're not even
right word?
Yeah, like you said, the anti-jamming, it's constantly punching, counter punching. I just read a whole thing about they're doing drone against drone. They're knocking down drones out of the skies with other drones.
Yeah, big drones versus little drones. Yeah, they took out that Russian Lancelor or something. Yeah, because it's big and slow. And they've taken out helicopters, Russian helicopters, Heinz, with small drones as well. So I mean, that's not doctrinal, but it's something that it's there, and it's significant.
And then, I mean, some major news that broke out, I guess, pretty recently, in August, about the Kursk invasion. Can you kind of explain that for people that haven't really heard about it, or how it happened, what the tactic was, and
that
how it
was
went
that's a very interesting situation, because that's really and truly the final red line for Putin, because Putin has always said, I won't use a nuclear weapon unless somebody invades Russian territory. Well, Ukraine has invaded Russian territory now for over a couple of months, and he hasn't used a nuclear weapon, and it's always that threat that's directed against not intelligent Western voters, but it's directed against young people, frankly, and people who are really and truly ignorant of the Russian mentality and what they want and the psychology and all of that. So Putin just wants to scare the normal citizenry of other countries when he starts talking about those things. But that's just another thing. It's just not going to happen for so many reasons.
Yeah, and I mean, I think something interesting is when he threatens nuclear weapons with an invasion, it goes back to the Budapest Memorandum. I think that's what it's called, back when the nukes were removed from Ukraine, and I think as well as Kazakhstan. But in that agreement, it basically said, whoever, if you're threatened, you seek immediate Security Council action to provide assistance. Should, in quotes, should become a victim of an act of aggression or an object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. And the U.S. has this sign that we sign this, and when someone's threatening nuclear weapons with a signatory country, it becomes interesting on that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to, the nuclear weapons are not going to be allowed
No.
to be used.
No way.
And, you know, this is not me saying this. I mean, General Petraeus has said it. Other former very high-ranking people, the highest-ranking people in government, have said that, you know, Putin has been told that if he uses a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, that the response, the conventional response by NATO would be overwhelming. Plus, there would be all sorts of things happening that we can't even, we're not even thinking about. I mean, if you think sanctions are one thing, there would be embargoes the next day. They would just completely shut off all payments between Russia and the rest of the world. Plus, China would back away. They've told Russia too that they're not going to support anything like that. And from the Ukrainian side, they're happy to tell you, look, what are you scared of? He's going to use it against us, and we don't care anymore. So why are you scared of nuclear weapons?
So, but it's working. I mean, in some ways, you can argue Putin is controlling American response and American policy by threatening
Yes.
World War III,
Yeah.
by threatening the nukes.
Yeah.
I mean, are they real? I mean,
Yeah, they say if America gives permission to Ukraine, it's an act of war and they're gonna use nuclear weapons, and keeps threatening these nuclear weapons, like dangling the U.S. and the entire world with this threat.
Well, he's made similar threats like that since the very first day. And again, if you look at the precise words that he uses, it's not, you know, it's meaningless. It gets down into like, what are you trying to say, really? Because there's nothing there that's very definitive. The Russians are very good at using language that is not precise, not definitive. So once again, when I read what he literally has said, it doesn't bother me in the least. And again, I just go back to the Ukrainian theory. What are you worried about? He's going to nuke us. It's going to be worse for him than it is for us.
but escalation, the word escalation, the fear of escalation is the #1 word in Washington, D.C. when it comes to this war or in the Middle East. Anything. They always throwing the word out, right?
What has he got to escalate with? And what is that going to get him? I just have to ask those questions when people talk about, oh, we're worried about the risk of escalation. Okay, let's think about it from his side. What's his risk? Can he do it? And what's in it for him in case it doesn't work? He doesn't have anything. He doesn't have an army. He doesn't have tanks. His Air Force is horrible. His anti-aircraft is obviously horrible because his planes won't fly over Ukraine. And there's really nothing to worry about with him. If World War III would not be Hollywood's nuclear exchange. If he wanted to do anything, if he were allowed to win in Ukraine, he would turn Ukraine into a Chechnya. That is an anti-Western state. Because let's remember, before that war, Chechnya was the most anti-Russian of all states in the former Soviet Union. Now they're like the chosen ones. You know, they're the top of the heap in the Russian Federation. Putin wanted to do the same thing with Ukraine, turn them into an antagonistic state on NATO's doorstep. And then next step is easy. It's Moldova, not even part of the EU yet. and then the Baltic of your choice, which apparently is Estonia. And then if anybody wants to mess with me, you say, look, you want to start a missile war? That's where World War III comes in. We'll start a missile war because we can handle it. And you guys can't. If you let him win this against Ukraine, that's where it goes. Succeed. I mean, nothing succeeds like success, and that will be seen inside Russia as proof that his policies work and are successful, and then it'll just continue.
Yeah, and I think Putin has said in an interview, like, if it goes to nuclear war, it's the end of the world. So I think he knows if any nukes are sent by Russia, his country's gone, every country's like, it's just gonna be the end of the world in a sense. So I think I don't think he's that stupid to even do it, but everyone's so scared that he will.
Yeah, no, there's so many billionaires and multi-millionaires around him. Life is good, and they're not happy that they're confined inside Russia. There's a lot of Russians, smart Russians inside Russia who understand what's going on here, but they're too afraid to do anything. They can't do anything. They don't have access to guns like we do. That's one thing you could never get away with this in the US. That's a whole nother issue, our gun laws, but you could never get away with that in the US because of our gun laws. But in Russia, the police, the security, they own the state. So there's nothing that they can do about that. And then all the good, go ahead.
No, he's really the new czar. I mean, like you've said before, he's a mafia. He's running a mafia empire there, huh?
It is absolutely. And yeah, the point was that all of those rich people around him, no one would, and they all have families. They all love their kids. They love their yachts. They love all the things that they own. That's what rich people do. They love the things that they own. Does anyone want to sacrifice any of that with a nuclear war? I mean, come on, stop. Never going to happen for so many reasons, and that's really the final one. I mean, Putin has, I think, 6 or 7 kids now. He loves his kids the same as anyone else, and he's put all of his family now into government positions. The people that that his family that he likes and trusts. It's just I don't even get into that discussion anymore about nukes.
The Russian natives being brought to the military. How's that going?
Oh, right. Yeah. It's the bonus money keeps going up and up and up. So now a guy who's normally making $100 a month deep in Siberia gets offered a one-time bonus of $2,500 plus $2,500 a month for combat duty, which he's being told is, not such a big deal, right? The other thing is they don't pay you these bonuses right up front. They pay them, they prorate them. So if you disappear after a month or you get killed after a month, your family doesn't get the rest of your bonus, by the way. So yeah, it's all the glitter of money, and you have to try to put that in perspective. That $100, I make $100 a month, and now this guy's going to give me 2 years of pay just to join, and then 2 years of pay for every month that I live on the battlefield. My family will get that money. That's how desperate they are.
Yeah. And can you explain why the family doesn't get the money maybe if they die? Like what's that process of if they die, does the families get the money? Where does the money get allocated?
Well, first of all, I have to prove that they're dead. If they're missing in action, which is sometimes very hard to get proof, especially on that battlefield, you don't get any money. And then, of course, as I said, if you were supposed to get that money over 6 months, but you died after 1 month, then the rest of that's goodbye.
What's how do the Russians treat their soldiers? Because I've heard stories of if someone there's soldiers in the back. If someone tries to go backwards, they shoot them. There's the crematoriums for the bodies. Like, can you explain what these soldiers are actually going through?
That's exactly what happened, especially early on. They brought crematoriums with them. For what reasons? We don't, that's speculation. It's to get rid of their own guys, to get rid of our guys, to hide any massacres. Don't don't really know. Um, and what was the other question?
Well, like, how are they treating their soldiers right
Oh,
now? And
yeah. Well, I've seen some of the captured food, and it's horrible. We don't want to eat that. And their army isn't structured like ours. There's only officers, and then there's soldiers, and they are brutally mistreated. There is no what we call a non-commissioned officer corps. Those are the guys that really bond the unit. They create the bonding between the officers and the enlisted guys, and that's what makes us so much more successful than them. So yeah, they're brutally treated, and when they go home, they're not getting VA care. Let's put it that way, like our guys do.
Let's switch gears and talk about why this war is important. Why should Americans care and support Ukraine? It's a big question during
yeah,
this.
and I think it's important too because the care and support of the Ukrainians has been a topic, I mean, in politics, as we've seen with the conservatives and with Trump, but also with people I'll talk to every day, maybe people that don't even understand politics fully, people on the left that are leaning, that are saying they don't want to send money to Ukraine. They want their tax dollars to stay here. They want to invest it into the US. They don't want to send it to some war to some other country. So it's almost a topic that's uniting people on both sides that are against it. It's an uphill climb for the Ukrainians regarding care and support.
Yeah, it's unusual combination of political foes out there this time. But when people ask me that question, I tell them every time, this is why we fought 2 world wars. World War I was about empires who wanted some part of other people's lands, and how many 100 million were killed as a result, I can't remember. And that was just World War I. And then as a result, World War II, you have the same issues again, this time propagated by Germans who want more land because this is ancient German land and this and that. And 2 world wars we fought over these ridiculous principles. Well, they're not even principles anymore. And we said that there would be no more wars, that we would respect one another's territorial integrity, and all things would be dealt with in a legal fashion on an international level. Made perfect sense. No violence. Now you have leaders, Putin being number one, who want to say, that system, we don't care. Might makes right. It always has, and that will never change. And these historical lands that are on Russia's periphery, these are all part of Russia. They were part of Russia. They're still part of Russia. So he wants to take us back, and that is the road to war. And if that's allowed to succeed, then the Taiwanese haven't got a chance against China. The world order in which we respect law has no chance of survival if Putin is allowed to win.
Another side benefit that doesn't really get mentioned is it's been a boon to the American defense industry. I mean, these arms orders, it's not just sending all those factories are churning out bullets and artillery shells and new systems. And not only that, our Western allies are buying more. So it's and they're actually paying for it. I mean, you could argue the Ukrainian we're borrowing money, the taxpayers are paying, right? But it's kind of an interesting side benefit or something that people don't even think about. But the people doing those towns where the factories are churning up military.
Yeah, most of those are Republican, by the way.
Right.
Which doesn't make any sense to me at all. Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. We're giving away things that we'll never use. The ATACMS is scheduled to go out of the inventory. We don't even need it anymore, so give it to the Ukrainians. There's a cost of getting rid of stuff too, by the way, which is you'd be surprised at how expensive it is to properly de-weaponize a missile system, a complicated missile system like that is. Give it to them to use it. Same with the tanks. We're not using the stuff. It's not going to get used. So it's the taxpayer's not actually paying for anything. We're just giving away stuff. The very few things that we did buy, like the M1 tanks, I still don't know why we did that. Makes no sense to me, but they did it. That was money spent. That's true. But otherwise, there's very little U.S. money spent. We're not making new F-16s or new M777s. We are going to make new Bradleys. And you're right. Everybody loves the American equipment because the survivability is impressive. All the troops talk about it. Everybody loves the Bradley.
So what would you
And for
say?
for the casual people, can you explain when it says, "Oh, we're sending $500 million to Russia or to Ukraine"? Is that gifts for the? Is that not gifts, but is that like handouts of military gear and equipment, or is that actual money? Can you explain that to like the casual person?
It's if you have to look a little bit deeper. If it says presidential drawdown authority, that just means he's taking what we have and giving it to them. There's no cash involved there. Okay. Most of the cash is coming from the European Union, by the way, because they have the responsibility to keep that economy functioning. Our main value added is the weaponry being as good as it is.
So tell me how. I'm an anti-Ukrainian American. I don't see why we're spending the money. What would you say to me? Why would you say this is important for you and your family and for all Americans that we continue supporting Ukraine? Why? What would you tell me as a non-believer?
Well, I keep going back to, this is why we fought 2 world wars and created NATO, to create global stability, a system that is run globally by international laws that are respected by all countries on the planet. Otherwise, if it's just going to be might makes right, you'll never be able to stop war. Every country that's bigger than its little neighbor says, hey, that piece of land next to you, that used to be mine. It's mine again. I want it. And there will be wars like that forever. It was truly a time in history, especially after World War II, where we had the chance to run the world, truly respecting law, international law that we could all accept and abide by. And if you allow this guy to win, we go back 2 centuries. It's that simple. We go back to the 19th century.
And the Republican stance in this past year has been, we need to pivot to China. Asia, is the future. We keep, fall into the European trap or the Middle East trap. So is that viable? I mean, should we just get a peace treaty on this, let the Russians keep what they want or they have right now, and move on and look toward Asia?
I think the best that they can hope for with Ukraine, and look, first of all, you have to stop Putin on the ground. If you don't stop him on the ground, he won't agree to anything. And you just have to look back to the Soviet leaders since Stalin talking to Truman, telling him directly over the phone, I'll keep my agreements when you make me keep my agreements. That's what you have to understand, first of all. If you want to win, you have to stop him on the ground. Then you decide if you really want him to lose. Because if you let him win, as I've been saying all through this, it doesn't stop for him. Okay. And it's a green light then for China because it worked in Europe, it should work in Asia. So yeah.
And I think also, let's say a deal is struck, Russia keeps let's say they keep the land they've taken so far. Would that just be, how people want, oh, that's peace, the war's over? Is that what it's going to be? Is it going to be a situation like Vietnam, how, where, oh, we'll pull out, don't go any further, and then a few years later they return and take it? Is it going to be something like that? What do you think? If a deal is met, let's say, I mean, this is going to come out when after the election. So if Trump's in, theoretically, this is very much a possibility.
Yeah, well, if you say, here's the deal, you keep what you've got, it's going to be contested like North Korea and South Korea, but Ukraine is coming into NATO in that form. It's coming into NATO, period. Then, yeah, you have Russia will not attack Ukraine anymore. If you make that red line very clear, bring them into NATO and say, fine, we're going to do it that way. If you don't do that, if you say, well, no, we're just going to have single bilateral security arrangements, and after they get into the European Union, we'll talk later. If you keep going slow like that, then yeah, you have a high chance of another war in 5 to 10 years, because it'll be perceived as success, that their strategy succeeded, and they just need another guy, a next Putin, to pick up the ball. So yeah, you have to stop him right where he's at.
So, I mean, this is a question that I'm curious about. Do you think this is a historical turning point, like a history book kind of moment? Because I asked that because this war has led China and Russia to be closer. I mean, North Korea and Iran have been major weapon export partners to Russia for this war. BRICS has recently added 4 new countries at the start of this year, and they're looking for even more expansion. China and Russia conducted a joint military operation in Belarus a few months ago, marking the first time China had troops in Europe. I mean, North Korean troops are showing up. Do you think this is potentially like going to be historically remembered as, a start moment for a World War III or a new Cold War if it hasn't started yet? Do you think this is a big historical moment for the future?
Absolutely, it is. We're right in the middle of it, and it's if not at the beginning of a third global war, it's at least the beginning, right in the middle of the beginning of a new Cold War, except that it's a Cold War that's between us and Russia and China. Russia and China against us. There's no pivot here. There's no, well, you're going to be my friend for 5 years and then I'm going to switch. That's not going to happen this time.
Well, the future we'll see. So we really want to talk about your work with Ukrainians suffering from the effects of the war. So tell us about the non-governmental organizations you're working with, and what you're accomplishing and what you need to get more accomplished.
Well, I'm certain that the biggest priority right now for the country are the wounded soldiers and their families. So the main 501c3 non-governmental organization, charity, if you will, that I work for, not work for, I'm a volunteer. None of us are paid. There are no admin expenses. I work for Veteran Coalition International, and what we're focused on most of all right now are electric scooters for multiple amputees and say paraplegics, for example, paralyzed guys. If you got even just one digit, you can make an electric scooter work. Because the number of amputees is an off the wall number. Like they were averaging between 400 and 700 a month during the worst of times. And so these guys have to wait anywhere between 6 months for like a simple above the ankle prosthetic, for maybe up to 2 years or a year and a half for something complicated with 2 legs, just because of the technology and the money involved. So getting these guys in an electric scooter, it's like giving them a new car for a guy with no legs, or a guy with 1 leg and 1 arm. He's got mobility because you get him outside and he can go at least 2 to 3 kilometers a day, no problem, which would be 0 otherwise. So that's a priority. And then another priority is there's a special surgical room that we're trying to buy for people who've been wounded by shrapnel. And it's not just metal shrapnel. People think of artillery shells and bullet shrapnel. Really, it's more like trees and buildings. If you can imagine artillery rounds coming from overhead, the amount of wood splinters and just splinters and BBs and all sorts of any kind of thing that comes out of a house when you hit it with an artillery piece. That's where the second most amount of damage is being done. And so we're raising money for that. That's a $25,000 surgical room. The scooters, typically the cheapest ones are $300, but typically they're around $500 for the ones that are good for our guys, especially paraplegics. And then the last.
Let me interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
Tell us give us a personal example of somebody who's gotten one of the e-scooters and how their life has changed and their reaction to it.
Well, it was like, yeah, the very first guy that I met was, can I keep this? And he said, absolutely. That's why we're bringing it here. He said, because he can go then 1 kilometer in this direction to this village and 1 kilometer in the other direction to the other village. He can, do things for the family, run chores, go see friends. So that's the response that you get from these guys. It's like, and I just want to work. I want to do something for my family is often what you hear from them about that stuff too. Then another personal example of not just the amputee situation, but the other huge problem is traumatic brain injury, TBI. TBI, you're in, if you don't get the right treatment right away, then you will just vegetate in that condition that you're in, and you'll never make progress. And it's by far the most expensive. It's like $100 a day. And those guys typically need at least 6 months more than what the government offers, which is currently 90 days. And so that's another big money project that we're trying to get people attracted to. And then a fourth one, it's kind of the smallest one, but we get used buses and used ambulances, hopefully for less than 10,000 euros each with the maintenance. And then those go to, again, these organizations inside Ukraine that support the wounded guys.
Take us through and tell us about, you just returned to Ukraine with a series of both e-scooters, ambulances from, I think it was Finland. Tell us about how that got done and the impact it made.
Yeah, well, there was two NGOs there that really led this operation. We just had the scooters as our part of the mission. But yeah, there were 27 total vehicles, most of it medical support of various types, and first responder type stuff, like a couple of ambulances and a fire truck and an excavator also. But that was actually, most of it was donated by Finnish sources, but there were also US sources, actually most of it in terms of pure dollar amounts. The cash was mostly American and the stuff, the gear was mostly Finnish. Yeah. And we went to several hospitals and other entities in Kiev to give that stuff.
And you drove what was it, 1,500 kilometers? How far you drove from?
Oh, a lot more than that. I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, from Helsinki, you have to take the ferry over to Estonia, then drive down to South Poland, and then South Poland directly east all the way to Kiev. You're probably talking about, well, over 1,000 miles, 1,000 to 1,200 miles, something like that. Maybe more, maybe more. But
And
yeah, volunteers like that. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, I think something important to note is we spoke about it earlier, how Russia would bring the crematoriums, they would leave bodies. Can you talk about how important it is and valuable and what sets you guys apart from the Russians with you guys taking care of your amputees and putting so much valuable resources into these NGOs that are helping the injured versus the Russians who, they're like, next. Can you talk about that value and the meaning and how important it really is?
Well, I mean, that shows the absolute difference between our cultures, between our armies. We value human life as the most important thing of all aspects in all parts of life, whether it's civilian life or military life. The most important aspect is the human being, not fantastic piece of equipment. The equipment's nothing without the human. And then when you just get right down to philosophy of what's important in life, is it people or is it things? Is it a concept or is it actual human beings? And I think the comparison is stark. In the West, we care about people and human beings. In the fascist world, they only care about control of things and control of people.
And can you talk about what you mentioned a lot of what you guys need and what you're pushing for. Can you mention what the goals are for whether it's the end of the year or the foreseeable future of what your goals are with the NGOs and what's ahead?
Yeah, no one can physically do enough, even if you got all the NGOs in the room and everybody figured out what everybody was doing, which would be a task in and of itself, impossible task. You would still find out that you're not doing enough, just not doing enough. So you got to pick a thing like we have that you think makes a critical impact in the country, either during the war or after it. And I've chosen finally to stay with the wounded and their families, because that'll be by far the biggest problem when this is over. The guys that are still supporting the frontline troops, God bless them. I'm all for that as well. But this has to end at some point, and it's the folks that are missing body parts and have family members that are wounded forever, one way or another. That's the future of the country. They're the ones that need help. They're the ones that are going to rebuild. So that's where I'd want to help.
Well, it's a good place to wrap up. It's Veterans Coalition International. It's www.vetcoa.org. And again, just to repeat, it's the e-scooters for paraplegic and multiple amputee veterans, buses and ambulance to help transport them and their families, the specialized surgical unit, and of course, the traumatic brain injury care. Thank you so much for your time. We learned a lot, and we hope to have you back on the show.
Thank you. My pleasure.